Nerf herders, listen up! Welcome back to Critical Reviews. I'm Captain Xavier, and today I shall be critically reviewing the BuzzBee Toys Adventure Force Thundershot. Now, this was sent to me by BuzzBee to do a review on, and in that review it was mostly an unboxing. Took it out of the box, plinked with it, fired darts through it, saw if it actually did live up to the numbers that were on the box, and it did. And so that's kind of how that review was, purely on its own merits. Today I'm going to be being a lot more critical. I'm going to be looking at some of the distinct downsides to it. I will talk about the things I like about it and where I think it definitely has a place. First, I will look at it from a non-modder, non-competitive consumer standpoint. If you're just going to Walmart to buy a blaster for your kids and this is on the shelf, what do I think you should really know about it? I will then look at it from a modder perspective. What mod potential does this blaster have, and what can be done and what I don't think really can be done, and whether I feel it's worth it. And then the last major topic I will discuss is the controversy of the two different versions that exist, and my thoughts on that and what it means and all of that. So if you're just looking at it from a pure consumer prospect, you're going to the store, you want to buy a toy, and you see this, what should you know? Well, it is an 8-round revolver, which is actually fairly high capacity for a revolver of this style. If you think about things like the Hammer Shot and the Sweet Revenge and the really popular Hasbro ones, they were all 5-round. Things like the Strong Arm, which is then not hammer primed, you got 6. And while there are ones out there that have 8, which I will be discussing in another video involving this blaster, there aren't very many. And they weren't nearly as common as, say, the Hammer Shot or the Strong Arm. So the 8 rounds isn't bad. It then is hammer primed, which is usually a really cool feature, and it's one of the features that I really, really like in a blaster, because it means you can use it one-handed. However, the general design of this makes it so it's very difficult to actually prime it one-handed. If you're holding the blaster properly, or what would be considered properly, with your index finger on the trigger, there really is no way anybody other than somebody with absolutely freakishly large hands or really long fingers to be able to reach and prime it without completely adjusting your grip on the blaster every time you go to do it. So that's definitely a downside. If you're going to have a hammer prime blaster, you should be able to prime it with your thumb. Now, if I switch my grip so that I use my middle finger instead of my index finger, now I actually can reach it. But I still have to adjust my grip a little bit, and it's still definitely awkward, and it's definitely not ideal. And I do believe they could have altered this hammer so that you could have reached it with your thumb. As it is, I think they were expecting you to be using it either two-handed and using your other thumb, or to be fanning it with your other hand. I don't think that they really believed anyone was going to be trying to wield this one-handed. It just isn't the way it was designed. So that's kind of the functionality of it. I do like that the cylinder completely encloses the dart. Most revolvers, the cylinder isn't quite long enough for the dart to be completely enclosed. And in this one it is, which means if you took the dart posts out, you could probably get 2 half darts in there. I'll go into that when we go into the modding. But I do like that there's no way for the darts to be sticking too far out and to get damaged and whatnot. So that's kind of nice. The grip, BuzzBee is known for having small grips, and this is no exception. If you had smaller hands, your hand might fit on there, but it would then probably be really blocky. I can barely get my whole hand on there. Again, if I hold it with only 2 fingers below and then like this, it's more comfortable, but it's still just kind of weird and awkward. You don't have quite as good a grip. The other thing that you should definitely be aware of is that there is a reason that this blaster is only $10, and that is because it is inferior quality in many ways. The plastic definitely feels more brittle, the internals do not feel quite as strong, and that's just the results that you're going to get when you have the cheap blaster, the $10 blaster as compared to the $15 blaster as compared to the $20 blaster. There are going to be inferiorities that are simply going to be inherent in order to be able to get the blaster to be that cheap. This is a fairly complicated blaster. Hammer primed, 8-shot revolver, there's a lot of mechanism going on in there. For it to only be $10, they had to cut costs somewhere, and a lot of that, we will see where I think a lot of that came from, as well as just the general plastic quality. Especially the grip down here. It definitely feels to be a more brittle plastic than you typically see on Nerf blaster, Nerf brand, Hasbro brand blasters. But it did perform as well as the box claimed. It got 80 feet. The box claimed to get up to 80 feet. Yes, I was shooting at pretty much a 45-degree angle, but I was able to get those ranges. When I went for the accuracy test, it performed subpar. I felt like there was a lot of drop. Upon further reflection, I think the horrific nature of the ergonomics was resulting in me holding it in such a way that I was aiming a foot below the target, and that's why there was so much drop. But that is still partially that I would say that was on me, but also that's on the blaster, that the natural way to hold it and to fire it resulted in you aiming a foot low than you would with any other blaster, and that's just because of how awkward it is, I believe. And that is a detriment. If you really wanted to like this blaster, you really wanted to wield it, it would just be a matter of learning where the sight picture is. Because for some people, this is a very desirable aesthetic. It is a huge, ridiculous-looking hand cannon. And there are people that very much dig big, ridiculous hand cannons, and this would be an excellent blaster for them. If they don't like the color, we will see later this blaster is ridiculously easy to disassemble and thus to repaint. And so you'd be able to make modifications to it fairly easily if you really wanted to. But as it is, the performance is what I would expect from a $10 revolver. If it were cheaper, I would expect worse. If it was more expensive, I would expect better. But it is what I would expect from the $10 version of a revolver. In fact, it actually slightly exceeds my expectations of a 10-round revolver. Let's take a look at some of the mod potential of it, because I've mentioned a few things that I really liked. One, the fact that the cylinder completely encloses the dart. That's something you don't see very often and does give you the potential of being able to double load half darts quite easily. You just have to remove the dart post. It also, like I said, comes apart very easily. I've taken out most of the screws, but I'll take out the last couple. The grip is held on by 4 screws and then just comes off easy as you could please. And I hope they don't take that as a challenge like Hasbro apparently did. So the grip comes off very easily, which makes it both easy to paint if you really wanted to change the color of it, but it also means that you could very easily add on a new grip. And I understand there already are 3D printed replacement grips for this, which apparently help with the aesthetics immensely and the ergonomics, because that was my biggest complaint, is the grip was just horrible. And it wouldn't be that difficult to make one that wasn't so horrible. So the fact that it comes off very easily, very, very nice. There are then only 5 more screws holding it together, and again, I've taken out most of them from the get-go. Take out the last one, and then this comes off very easily, and there is nothing attached. Dropping stuff. There's nothing attached to it, and so this would, again, be very easy to paint if you really wanted to. The whole barrel section then comes out, again, so you can either leave it orange if you want the barrel to be orange, or again, make it easy to paint, or, once again, make it easy to replace with something else entirely. If you didn't want this big, cartoonishly flared barrel, you could get rid of it. Without it, this thing is really not that much larger than a hammer shot. It's now quite, you know, a snub-nosed if you wanted to replace this little section with a little 3D printed section so there wasn't a weird gap up there. Again, it would be very simple. So cosmetically, this thing does have all kinds of mod potential for aesthetic mods. Let's talk about the internals. Now, I was fully expecting this to operate exactly like a hammer shot does, where the spring is compressed down into the grip, and then it latches and it fires. But it isn't like that. This one, in fact, has the spring in the plunger like pretty much all non-hammer primed blasters have. And that, I feel, probably gives it a little bit more mod potential because it's easier to have a variety of springs that'll fit into a system like that. The downside is that the version that I have and the version that many people are finding, the latch mechanism, the catch mechanism, is like a hammer shot's, but is decidedly weaker. There are the 2 points where there is a lot of stress on this system and it just doesn't feel very strong. The first is right here at the trigger point. It's very weak right here, but that is an area where there is a lot of stress and a lot of mechanical disadvantage. And the other point is the counterpoint to that on the priming, or the hammer, that locks up against that trigger point. So when you pull this back, if I can get it to pull back, there we go. Those 2 pieces lock against each other in there, and that's what holds it back. But there's a lot of leverage being put on those 2 parts, And those two parts are not particularly strong, and I have heard of people having problems with it already breaking just out of the box, and quite frankly, I'm not entirely surprised. Those definitely should be a lot stronger, and definitely could be a lot stronger. And I would be worried about how heavy of a spring load you could put in there before one of those two parts failed. There are metal pins that go through, so I'm not worried about that breaking. I'm worried about stress fractures on these two parts themselves. But there is definitely still potential. Now, there's obviously the potential of replacement cylinders. This one is a little bit more complicated because there's a hollow section behind the cylinder that actually goes over part of the internals, which is unlike any of the previous ones. But that also does open up some possibilities for some interesting mods, because you would be able to cut notches in that shroud to be able to rear load. Normally you'd have to cut the notch out of this section to be able to rear load your cylinders. But with these, it would just be a matter of either cutting that ring off entirely or just cutting loops out of it right behind each barrel to allow you to then rear load, or to design a barrel that specifically had those loops opened up so that you could rear load. So that is actually a neat design. The design on the cylinder is interesting, and like I said, there are things that I like about it. The plunger tube is not huge, but it's also not tiny. It's a perfectly respectable plunger tube. It's larger, I think, than a Hammershot's plunger tube. And so if you could strengthen the catch mechanism, you could probably put a decent-sized spring in there. Now, you might want to make a longer hammer to give you some more leverage on priming it, because I ran into the issue with the Tricerablast, which had a similar mechanism where the plunger was, the spring was up here instead of down here like on most hammer prime blasters. But on too heavy of a spring load, the internals couldn't support that. And that's really the concern here, is that if we increase that spring load at all, this catch mechanism is simply not going to be able to hold. So the question then becomes, is it worth people's while to design better versions of these two parts? Making a stronger trigger or hammer, either through 3D printing or resin casting or even metal casting, because we have train. We have metal triggers and hammers for Hammershots because those were considered really, really good blasters and worth the effort. Well, this comes inherently with an 8-round cylinder, which makes it as good as even the most heavily upgraded Hammershots outside of Radioactive's ridiculous capacity ones. So it might be, people might feel that it is worth their while. If this plunger tube is able to give a significant power increase with a heavier spring, replacing these two parts would hypothetically be viable. The question is it worth anybody's time? Or is it even viable to get those up to a heavier spring load? But I do believe that there is potential. The question is whether anyone thinks it's worth the effort. And I can't speak for anybody else. That kind of design is outside of my skill set and my interest, but if anyone were to design upgraded parts for these, I would love to see it and to give it a try. So yes, there is definitely some mod potential, but I think it would take a decent amount of work, and so we will see where that goes. Now for the controversy. The big controversy that has been going around concerning this blaster was that the first person to review one, Mongoose Jake, if you haven't checked out his channel, you definitely should. He does a lot of good reviews. He was sent one of these by BuzzBee, and he gave it an absolutely glowing review. He thought it was an excellent blaster. It was perfectly viable. He liked, he agreed the aesthetics were a little goofy, but that was obviously intentional. But functionally, he gave it a very good review. Well, as soon as the people started getting their hands on them out in the wild, it became very clear very quickly that he must have gotten a different blaster than they did. And once the internals were examined, sure enough, the one that he had a black catch, a spring-loaded black catch mounted in this area, and then there was a hook on the hammer, and it came back and hooked into that catch. The style of catch you see in most blasters, especially the ones that get heavily modified, where you have an actual proper moving catch that's spring-loaded and that can be modified and the spring can be increased and all of that. That would have been a much, much stronger catch mechanism than what we ended up getting. And of course, people's initial, knee-jerk reaction going to the worst-case scenario was that BuzzBee had intentionally sent him a superior blaster to get a good review, and was, I don't know, hoping we wouldn't notice, which I found dubious because they had to know we'd figure it out and that it would look bad. And the reason I don't think that's the case anymore is that other people have found the Black Catch version in the wild. The cylinder on them has a matte finish, and so, but they have been found. Other people have found them. Now I don't know if they're only available in some places. My guess is that was the original design. The initial design, they went with that, it worked, and then somehow some engineer, some bean counter, somebody worked out that this mechanism was much cheaper because it didn't require a catch and it didn't require a catch spring. It just required a slight modification to these two parts, and you could eliminate a spring and the catch and make the molding a little bit simpler. And that's how you keep this blaster to $10 and still be able to make a profit off of it. It's unfortunate if that is the case. If you give them the most charitable benefit of the doubt, and that it was simply a matter of they changed design after they'd already sent Mongoose Jake his, that still reflects badly on them because they should have sent him a new one when they changed the design. Just for full transparency, we've changed the design, here's the new version, please review it as well. Because changing the design on a blaster that's being sent to somebody who does modding looks bad. I mean, like I said, everybody jumped to the worst conclusion that they'd done it on purpose, that it was, you know, immoral business practices and all of that. And my guess is it was just slightly more negligence, but also, you know, going with a cheaper design is, I understand business choices like that. But they definitely should have done their due diligence and sent out the new version as soon as they switched designs. Just to prevent it from looking like the way it looked. So that's my take on that. I would love to get my hands on the Black Catch version. If anybody has one and is willing to part with it for love or money, let me know. Because I would love to be able to do a comparison of the two. I would love to see, especially to try to mod the two and see what difference, you know, try to put K26 in both of them. Can one of them take it and the not can, stuff like that. But I would need to be able to get my hands on a Black Catch version, and I don't know if there's any rhyme nor reason to where those are still available, or if it was just a very limited first release and they're all already gone. If they were recalled, I don't know any of the details like that. I don't have an inside source with BuzzBee, obviously. So yeah, that's my take on the controversy. I will probably order another one just so that I can have two, because I do plan to try to mod one, but I have other videos that I want to do, so if I end up breaking it, I'm going to need a replacement. Maybe I'll get lucky and I'll get a Black Catch off Amazon or Walmart.com. Who knows? If anyone does know if there's some rhyme or reason as to which ones are going where, or how common they are, or what's going on, I mean, for all we know, these were the ones that were decided to be replaced by the Black Catch version, and these ones just leaked into circulation. I don't know. I was sent this one by BuzzBee, but I believe they ordered it directly from Walmart, so who knows? Anyway, there are my thoughts on this. I definitely think that there are better options if you're looking for a ridiculous hand cannon, but there aren't cheaper options, and that's kind of where you got to balance it. The Fortnite 6SH is definitely a superior quality blaster, but it's twice as expensive and has 2 fewer rounds. So what are you going for? It makes a difference. I definitely believe that there is mod potential, but it might take a lot of work. We might really have to replace the trigger and hammer if we want to be able to mod these past anything other than just a very basic mod. There are definitely cosmetic potential. Between making new grips and a new hammer that actually can be reached, I definitely think that would be possible. There's plenty of travel here. They could definitely have something that came down and curved up. I think there's definitely potential. But it's going to be up to the people that really design all those mods whether they feel it's worth the effort. One last note that I would like to bring up about this as to why I really like the existence of this blaster, if perhaps not the blaster itself. This is the first hammer-primed blaster we have seen outside of Hasbro. And as a result, I find it very encouraging if BuzzBee is willing to make a hammer-primed blaster, perhaps Dart Zone is as well. I would love to see a hammer-primed revolver with Dart Zone Pro quality performance. A lot of people were really hoping that that's what this would be, because it, again, was the first hammer-primed blaster outside of Hasbro, and they're like, hooray, finally, a cheap replacement for the Hammershot. Unfortunately, it is a cheap replacement for the Hammershot, and you get what you pay for, but I'm hoping this will result in other companies following suit, or perhaps BuzzBee learning their lessons from this one and giving us something better. But I would love to see more hammer-primed blasters from more companies so that we can get more variety, because I am a huge fan of the hammer-primed concept of being able to dual-wield blasters that don't require batteries is something that I consider to be a great advantage in a lot of ways. So that is my last thought on this, is that I appreciate the innovation. There's definitely improvements that could be made, but there are improvements that can be made. You can't improve something that doesn't exist. This exists, it means it can be improved. So that's my thought on that. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, what you think about the different versions, about the blaster in general, about the possibilities that it brings up. Be nice, and thank you guys for watching.